Wonderful. That means you out there in the wonderful Twitch-verse, I think I may have made that up, can now see us and hear us with any luck. My name is Matthew Dawkins, and I'm joined by a wonderful array of panelists, co-hosts, if you will, for this World of Darkness themed panel. We have some specific points, some pillars that we are looking to tackle. Ghost Hunters in the world of Wraith, and Werewolf in the world of Ferrer. Let's be generous to the Ferrer. Yeah. Gaia, if you like. And there's a reason for that. Partly recent releases. Of course, we want to draw your attention to them. If you're not familiar with them, we want to be able to talk about our recent work. But also because there is a hidden agenda here, and that is Vampire and Mage always get the attention. These are the games that get the most, I guess, fan clamor. And I think Ghost Hunters and Wraith and Werewolf the Apocalypse need that energy behind them. So I'm very glad to see people tuning in live, and I will be inviting you to pose your questions as this panel goes on. Before I get to my panelists and allow them to introduce themselves, which will be very nice of me, I'm sure, I just want to say thank you very much for tuning in to this and hopefully other parts of Onyx Path Con. This weekend has been going very well, and we've raised a good amount of money for charity, which I'm sure we will be announcing in the Monday meeting notes at some point once we've got all the figures squared away. If you have any free time this Sunday evening, there are still games available on Start Playing that you can sign up for. Lots of Onyx Path games, and just keep in mind that 40% of the money that you pay to sign up goes to charity. It goes to the Badhana Group, who use TTRPGs as therapeutic tools. 50% of it goes to the GM. 10% of it goes to Start Playing, who are hosting the game ads. So this isn't a for-profit Onyx Path operation. This is supporting the GM, supporting charity, supporting our hosts. And so, yeah, we are real hopeful that more and more people are going to sign up to games, because everyone who has so far and fed back to me has said how much they've enjoyed them. So take an opportunity to play something you wouldn't normally have a chance to do. The last thing I'm going to say before we dive in full, and I know it's somewhat off-piste given the subject matter, is we do have an Indiegogo campaign running right now, a crowdfunder for Exalted Exigence. I wanted to raise it because I'm actually a bit jealous of some of my in-house developers, Eddie and Dixie. Whenever they've been mentioning it on their panels, I've seen the figures on the Indiegogo go up. And so I want to show that I can do the exact same thing. If you haven't actually supported Exalted Exigence yet on Indiegogo, please consider it, whether it's for $1, $10, or however much, to get access to a PDF, a print copy. Just keep in mind that if you support it at any level, you will have access to the manuscript for the book, so you'll know what you're getting. And if it turns out to be a game you don't like, you can always cancel your pledge before the end of the campaign. So now, that's said and done, let's introduce my co-panelists. First, I'm going to go for one of my co-authors from Ghost Hunters, but that is by no means their only credit. Michelle, could you tell us a little about yourself and what you have worked on, or what you do work on?
All right, so I've been a game designer and writer since the 90s. I used to be a contractor for Wizards of the Coast, and I ran massive Vampire the Masquerade mix-up LARPs. So there was Wraith and Werewolf and a lot of other fun stuff at Origins, Gen Con, way back in the day. But folks might know me better as a person in reality TV. I am a ghost hunter on shows like Paranormal State. I work with Jack Osborne and Osborne Media's Portals to Hell, and am also an author of nonfiction on paranormal and the occult, including the Dictionary of Demons.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. Welcome, Michelle, and we are also joined by Kat. Hello again, Kat. Please tell anyone who is unfamiliar who you are and what you work on.
Hello, I'm back. I do not have such a cool and impressive career as Michelle. Wow. But I do design and write for games, including the Ghost Hunters Jumpstart and the Apocalyptic Record and some other werewolf stuff for which my mind has gone blank. Anyway, hi.
Well, a brief aside, I think I've mentioned this on at least one interview before, but Kat and I first came to know of each other through working on Werewolf 5th Edition back when it was being made by Renegade. Before it was taken in-house by Paradox. I don't know if our work ended up in the trash. It may have, but
I'm still waiting to find out.
Yeah, that's beside the point. I'm half expecting to see us credited and think, which parts of this did we write? This was 3 years ago.
Right.
But nevertheless, that's how we actually came to know each other, because of the funny world in which RPGs are made. But we are also joined, and not made, as the case may be. Michele, hello again. Welcome back. Please tell the audience who you are and what you work on.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michele Masola. I am a Onyx Path freelancer from Italy. What I worked on, I wrote for the Apocalyptic Record. It was my pleasure to work there. And I also wrote for the Chronicles of Darkness, for They Came From Line, for the Trinity Continuum, and also for Scion. I work here and there on stuff. But today I'm here for Werewolf.
A real Renaissance writer. And I am Matthew Dawkins, and if you're unfamiliar, I am a developer, writer for all kinds of games, but I have a long reputation within the world of darkness, most prominently with Vampire, but I've touched every World of Darkness game now in some manner or other, because it was under my oversight at Onyx Path when we were making lots of these things, but now we're very much focused. And let's talk about what we're focused on, because this panel, as you can tell from the title, has got a Ghost Hunters and Werewolf theme. And these are games that, as I mentioned before, well, we're very happy with them. Let's get that out of the way. We're very proud of these books. We spend a lot of time on them, making them exactly the games we want them to be. But that's not to say that they are always the most popular. It would be a lie to say that Ghost Hunters is on the level of Vampire the Masquerade in terms of popularity, or even that Werewolf is of Mage the Ascension. And we want to use this panel to help draw attention to why these games are so fantastic. So part of that, I think, comes through empathy, the ability for the viewer to relate to the panelist. So, Michele, as you mentioned, you've had a long and storied past with the World of Darkness. So let's go for the ultra-generic question that gets asked on these panels, but it's hopefully informative. I'm sure it will be. What drew you to the World of Darkness the first time around?
College gaming group. We were spitballing something to play that wasn't D&D because we were a little burned out on it. And I had run across the very first edition of World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade. And what caught my attention, not only because I was a goth and like hugely into Lost Boys and everything, but the personable aspect of creating these characters, how they felt much more like they really dug into the humanity of these inhuman characters. Probably the most freeing aspect right off the cuff was nature and demeanor as an alternative to what always felt like a stifling and black and white alignment system in D&D. Mm-hmm. And I was not disappointed. Like the depth of story and like really intense psychodrama that you could dig into with Vampire the Masquerade had me hooked from the first moment I started DMing that game.
Fantastic. I think a lot of people did certainly find it through their student days. It was a game that had an appeal among the youth of the time that some of the more traditional games certainly didn't. That's the reputation World of Darkness often has. What about you, Kat? How did you make your journey to the World of Darkness?
I too was a teenage goth in Swansea, and there wasn't a lot for teenage goths to do in Swansea. So when my entire gaming group trooped into the very small role-playing section on the very top floor of the comic shop, which is itself the size of like a public bathroom, the only books we found that weren't D&D were World of Darkness. And in sequence, teenage goth me went for vampire, for the aesthetic, and now definitely a furry friend went for werewolf, for the raw power and the animalistic primal nature of it, and power gamer buddy went for mage. And I would say that within 2 weeks we had all like fundamentally changed the way that we had been role-playing, from characters in service to a plot to arguably a plot in service to these weird and wonderful characters exploring their personal trauma and their various monstrous natures. And I don't think any of us ever looked back.
What about you, Michaeli?
Well, the experience about being a teenage and got tracks.
Oh, you've fallen mute. How very odd. Keep speaking. Have you become unplugged or something? Okay. Well, while you're sorting that out, I'll tell my tale. And well, mine is a lot less interesting. I had a cousin who knew I was into role playing. I'd only just really got into it, and was a big collector of World of Darkness books and a big player of Vampire. But the books that really appealed to me were the ones for Wraith. I loved the Cobb artwork in those, the sort of intricate bordering, the sort of almost tendril-like art that was stretching across the pages in that book. It just hooked me in the same way that the Di Talizzi art did for Planescape. It was just, it captivated me before the text. And certainly I got into Vampire as well in a major way. But yeah, Wraith was the one that made me think, oh, wow, okay. From an aesthetic standpoint, this is quite remarkable. Later, through that similar, I guess, art appreciation, I came to really enjoy the muscular art of Werewolf, the Apocalypse. And when I say muscular, I mean that Ron Spencer art that has a certain 3D vivid nature to it that very much stands in contrast to a lot of the art that was present. I guess the duotone Vampire, the very sketchy and woodcut Wraith, and the more colourful Changeling. You had this sort of rippling, visceral art in Werewolf. But yeah, that's what drew me in. And then from that point on, I wanted to play nothing but World of Darkness. And for a long time, I did.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. I don't know what happened, but I'm here. Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
I'll say that the teenage got experience tracks there, and as a fun, as far as I could remember of anything supernatural or monstrous, I went looking for more for tools to explore that, for good material to read. Basically, I started looking. I arrived to the World of Darkness not exactly for the role-playing aspect, but for read cool books about cool stuff I could love. So it was a little bit difficult because I basically explored everything by my own, and I think with the budget I had back then, finding my very first book, which was a Wraith second edition, because I love the premise of Wraith and the ghost aspects, and I don't talk about that much, but I like ghosts. So the moment I opened that book with a very it was beautiful, the art, everything. So I was hooked, and in the following month, everything else followed. And then the second thing I clearly remember was the Guy Davis art for the Wyrm monstrosities in Book of the Wyrm second edition. I remember that very well, and so everything else happened.
Oh, fantastic. Well, while we have been waxing eloquent, we've also had several questions already come in. Zach has, as ever, asked how we're all doing today. I think we may have answered that, but people, yeah, no, not bad. Things could be worse. We've also got a question here that I will probably be able to answer. I think it's Salakit. Well, we'll say the Lion. Asks, how's Icons of Rage doing? Icons of Rage is doing very well. It's a Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition book that is currently in editing. It's all fully written. It's just in editing. It's in the queue. We're not going to push it forward until Apocalyptic Record is done. In the case of a lot of World of Darkness books, we have a certain idea of the order we want to release them in. That's partly influenced by Paradox, partly decided by us. And Icons of Rage, I'm very happy with it. Just to tease some of the content, not only is it going to have archetypal characters from the Werewolf the Apocalypse canon, it also has new characters that fill all kinds of holes, I guess, in the meta plot and that you can add into your game, but also characters who are introduced in the Apocalyptic Record too. This was actually a book that was requested a lot after Beckett's Jihad Diary for us to do a Children of the Night using Beckett's Jihad Diary as a template. We never did it. And the reason was we were determined at the time, or in fact, we knew at the time that Beckett's had to be our last V20 book because V5 was coming. So we couldn't just add on another source book. We just had to add stretch goals to Beckett's Jihad Diary. In the case of Apocalyptic Record, we had more freedom to add more books because W5 isn't right on our doorstep like V5 was back then. So that's why Icons of Rage is separate. Okay, so from the same person, I'm just going to shorten your name to Lion. I hope you don't mind. We've got a question here for anyone here who's a real system head. What's your favorite Werewolf the Apocalypse gift? So, as people go scrabbling through their books, I'm expecting lots of answers with the word claws in. Or sense worm. That's a cheat answer, I'm afraid. My one has two names. Sometimes it's known as Territory. Sometimes it's known as Predator's Many Eyes. It's a red talon gift primarily. I think white howlers also have access to it if you play with them. It's a gift that I enjoy because it makes me think of what I love about Apocalypse and what I love about Forsaken, Werewolf the Forsaken. It's simply a gift where you mark your territory as a wolf might, and if a predator, if someone threatening enters your territory, you can then start looking through their eyes. It's basically a way of marking somewhere as yours. So if you want to protect a cairn, a certain batch of kinfolk who are very important to you, that sort of thing, it's a really good way of doing that. I just like it. It feels thematic. It feels very appropriate for the Red Talons as well, because they're incredibly bestial by nature, or by stereotype at least. So yeah, that's what I would go for. Does anyone have anything else to throw in the way of Werewolf the Apocalypse gifts?
I think it made it into Werewolf 20th. I can't fully remember, but it's the Metis gift shell, where you effectively disassociate so hard that nothing can touch you. And it touches on a lot of the things I really love about the Metis, like the power in making yourself small, the power in accepting that you are small and outcast and overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
And becoming something that no one can understand and no one can push you because no one's worse on you than yourself, essentially.
Yeah, that's another nice thematic power. Anything from anyone else?
I mean, for me, it was... Go ahead.
Oh, wait, sorry.
No, you go. You go.
Okay. One I always remember is Eyes of the Thunderbird, which you'll find in the Wild West supplements. And it's a cool one in a way that you channel Thunderbird and shoot lightning out of your eyes. It's not very deep as an explanation, but I like it. I go with it.
We need aggressive gifts as well.
Hmm.
And what about you, Michelle?
Anything and everything that has to do with traveling through the Umbra. Like it didn't matter. Like all of the shamanic elements and the unabashedly shamanic elements of Werewolf, just that hooked me. And for me, that was the point of inflection between the Giovanni, like the world of spirits, like a very fertile ground to bring in several disparate systems. So hold that thought, because we're going to be visiting that again soon. The idea of Giovanni, wraiths, werewolves, all living in perfect harmony or not. So
Almost certainly not. So let's talk a little about what we've actually written for Ghost Hunters, Wraith, Werewolf in recent years, to maybe build up a little hype, enthusiasm from the viewers for what's to come and what has recently been released. And Michelle, you were saying how you've obviously got a deeply involved career when involved in the paranormal. But I, off the top of my head, could not say exactly what you wrote for Ghost Hunters because it was some time ago. So maybe you could describe for the viewers what your contribution was.
Well, my primary contribution was as the consultant for verisimilitude. So as a person who's boots on the ground, a paranormal investigator, who's like, what equipment do people use? What do people believe? So a lot of parts of the book that reflect actual paranormal investigation has some of my influence on it. The part that I got to write is, I think I drop enough hints that it is a Giovanni undercover agent who has infiltrated one of these little groups and is just very politely going through the notes and things of becoming part of one of these paranormal investigator groups. I unabashedly dropped a bunch of Easter eggs that tie back to my Providence Chronicle and a bunch of homebrew stuff that Eddie from Pugmire will recognize. And honestly, it was my first like official credit. I did work with people for Dark Carnival, for some of the early Giovanni stuff. Like you see the influence of my Chronicle in a bunch of things, like there's callbacks. One of the characters in the old card game was a callback to a character from that. But this is the first time I got to have my name in the book, which was a long time coming and pretty freaking awesome.
It is always a thrill to see your name printed. And what about you, Kat? You mentioned that you've worked across Werewolf and Ghost Hunters. Tell us about your contributions.
I would have to say my contributions are relatively minor. I did the Jumpstart adventure for Ghost Hunters, and I love doing Jumpstart adventures because I get to just chill in the background until the core book is written and people like Michelle have done all of the hard work, and then I get to plunder it for really cool ideas and write an adventure that, you know, showcases as best I can the mood and themes of the book. And for this one, I wrote a very classic haunted house horror story, and I loved every second of it. But for anyone who's played it, I did absolutely brutalize Wraith the Oblivion lore, and I'm very sorry.
Oh, no. It was fine, you know. But I mean, you really played up the reality TV paranormal investigators visiting a haunted house angle. But the thing is, I don't think there's anything wrong with visiting the well and going to something that's so archetypal. With a jump start, that's exactly what you want.
Exactly. It has to be classic and it has to be core to the book.
Yeah.
I was a little bit more respectful to the lore when I worked on the Apocalyptic Record, though. Yeah, you may all be glad to know. But I wrote for that sections of the Arun's Tale and the Philodox's Tale.
By all means, go into some detail on what you wrote as far as you recall.
It was so long ago.
It was. We were so young then.
Yeah. So I got to take my favorite auspice, which is the Philodox, and my least favorite auspice, which is the Arun, and try to figure out, you know, what I loved most and what I wanted to leave as the legacy of these auspices in Werewolf 20. And for the Philodoxes, it was an array of bad decisions, both on their own behalf and on other people's. And for the Arun, I got to look at the legacy of the War of Rage. Not the War of Rage, sorry, the War in the Amazon.
Yes.
Words are very difficult today. Sorry, chat. Yeah, and just make sure that nobody ever gets to forget about one of the Garrot's biggest cock-ups.
Yeah, it's you did present in that chapter, especially the Arun one. Well, what we did, I think, pretty well throughout Apocalyptic Record was show victories that are almost all Pyrrhic and tragedies aplenty, because that is Werewolf at its core. It's, you know, yes, succumb to the rage, take it out on the worm, but when you when you finally calm down from that state, you are able to behold the massacre, the carnage around you, and you've got to start questioning, was all of this strictly necessary? Was there a better way? Some Alrune are capable of such reflection, others absolutely are not. They're the propagandists for the auspice almost, you know? And the fact that we had all of these different perspectives on the Amazon War, who, you know, some were saying this was our great victory, the sacrifice was worthwhile, and you've got other werewolves saying, but it's still the worm is still
not
there.
Better.
What did we do? We bloodied its nose.
We bloodied its nose, and we offended so many of the other Fera.
Yes,
That was totally worth it, folks.
I mean, that could be the subtitle for Werewolf the Apocalypse, running back about 5,000 years. I think.
Really good. We're bad at making friends.
Yes. Well, speaking of 5,000 years of Werewolf, Michaela, your contribution to Apocalyptic Record does stretch back that far and probably farther still.
Yeah, one half of what I wrote for Werewolf covered the metaplot chapter, which included a vast timeline of everything Werewolf I could manage to put in the word count. And I keep hearing that I did a good job with that. People seem to appreciate what I did with the metaplot chapter and that timeline. I've heard it's impressive. So I'll take that. I don't believe that because my brain works like that, but I'll take the compliments over the... I basically just read a lot of books, made a lot of notes, and tried to put them into one single place and make that work. I also wrote for my favorite auspice as well, and because I worked for the Church, and I really love the shamanistic aspects of the auspice and the connection they have with the Umbra and and I try to express that as a reflection that's also part of his opposite, because I think that both worlds influence each other, and I did that in a way that whether I covered New York and the worm, or other aspects like the influence totems have on the tribes, or I also managed to touch upon one of my favorite aspects of the whole metaplot, which is the Bat and the Shadow Lords and those that would try to make up for the mess that is one of the major oopsies that the Garus made along the way. So there's this theme of healing and possible, if very, very difficult, redemption that comes with taking into account what the Earth, the Garu have caused, but that also there's still a little bit of hope in the apocalypse if they try hard, basically.
Yeah, I've always found it very difficult to write from the perspective of totems, patron spirits, because you need to convey a certain amount of alienness, but also there has to be some relatability. Otherwise, well, for one thing, they're going to be very difficult to play, and players aren't necessarily going to want to interact with them if they're completely out there. And you did do that remarkably well. I've covered Apocalyptic Record at length in lots of videos. One thing I wanted to draw attention to that I'd worked on recently across these lines was Howls of the Apocalypse, which I'm not the only person here that worked on it. But as we're talking about our own contributions, as a writer, I wrote a chronicle for Howls of the Apocalypse, which incorporates several of my favorite aspects of Werewolf. And firstly, I wanted us to make Howls of the Apocalypse because there are so few, maybe even none, pre-written chronicles for Werewolf the Apocalypse. I think there may be one in Monkey Wrench, but other than that, I don't think there were many. Perhaps some real short ones at the end of City sourcebooks or Rage Across sourcebooks. But certainly no Giovanni Chronicles, Transylvania Chronicles kinds of things. And using a lot of what we learned from the V5 Chronicle books that we made, Let the Streets Run Red, Trails of Ash and Bone, I wanted to take that and put it in Howls of the Apocalypse. And so I wrote a chronicle, which you will get to see because Howls of the Apocalypse will come out not too long after Apocalyptic Record, I imagine, that incorporates Pentex, of course, love Pentex, and Circinus cigarettes or Circinus tobacco, because it's a subsidiary we don't see as often as Endron and Magadon and the rest. It involves skull pigs, because I love Grondir, were-boars, were-pigs, and a skull pig warlord that is capable of shape-shifting, which is against what skull pigs are capable of doing in theory. It incorporates trips through the Umbra to what would they be? I'm trying to think now whether they go to the atrocity realm, but to some rather unpleasant places that exist in Werewolf the Apocalypse. And of course, there's got to be a big showdown with burning tobacco fields in the background by the end of it. And it was just glorious to be able to write a full chronicle for Werewolf the Apocalypse to finally help storytellers say, okay, this is a chronicle you can run across several sessions and really let your players go. And all of the authors on that book did such a fine job. They can be linked together, these chronicles, or they can be played apart. I know, Kat, I think your work incorporated not just werewolves, but also several Fera.
I think I did mention, no, someone else did Farah in there. I just gave you black spirals and a visit to the Umbra on the back of a giant totem spirit.
That's right. I'm confusing the totem spirit with that. My apologies. But yes. But yeah, I think people will like Howls of the Apocalypse, and I think it's going to be a bit of a dark horse release. I think people will like it a lot. Now,
I can't believe you didn't tell me there were skull pigs in your chronicle. Just hidden there this whole time.
I'm hoping they'll get on the cover because we've never pictured skull pigs before except in interior.
That is wrong.
Exactly. They, at least in my chronicle, they believe they should be the black spiral dancers in the hierarchy of enemies. But, you know, I like a bit of bebop and rocksteady. I don't know if we ever did wear rhinos. I hope not. So I've got a question, and it's a big one. It's, I guess, your elevator pitch, and we'll go in reverse order this time. Michaeli, how would you convince a storyteller to run Ghost Hunters or Wraith or Werewolf if they have never done so before? What would be your selling point to either storytellers or a player? What do you think could draw someone in?
I think something that goes across both games is I'm using the word in and not as a mechanic, but the pathos and the passion that runs across both games, because both ghosts and wraiths, in a sense, the perspective from the Ghost Hunter is from those who experience strong passions that linger in our world, while in Wraith are those very feelings that bind people and ensure they become wraiths, while that in werewolves usually take the shape of the rage and the desire to fight back against all that's going wrong with the world, because the worm is basically this. But I think the passion is the driving element for both games, and it's what hooked me in the first place, and what I used to get others in.
How about you, Kat? What do you think is the sales pitch you would throw at people for any of these games?
So two very different reasons why I think you should play Werewolf the Apocalypse, and why I think, in fact, when we finish this panel, you should go and get Werewolf 20. Just start playing right now. One, it's the easiest step sideways. See what I did there?
Oh, very good.
From a traditional adventuring game like Dungeons and Dragons to a more character-led personal horror story of the world of darkness, because you do have a strong external enemy and you do have, you know, strong, clear, direct purposes for you to follow. But it's also how you do a Greek tragedy in a role-playing game.
Yeah.
And that is one hell of a combination. You take creatures that are so powerful and so directed and frankly so full of themselves that, you know, Worm and the End of the World aside, they are their own worst enemy. And the most interesting story in Werewolf is how you balance your humanity against your wolf, against your spirit, and how if you tip even slightly out of balance, and if you give yourself permission to like stop keeping those reins on yourself, you'll become an absolute horror and a disaster. And I love that.
And how about you, Michelle? What would you say? Someone comes up to you and they say, "I've heard of this Ghost Hunters book, and I don't know. Wraith has always felt like a difficult game to get into. What is it about Ghost Hunters that I would enjoy?"
The first fun thing about Ghost Hunters is if you've ever watched reality TV and wanted to be like, you know, I kind of want to LARP that. I kind of want to play that. So it lets you just put together your own team and go wild with it. But the other thing that I love about all the World of Darkness books is, of course, this is horror role-playing. So the real thing is, do you want to play a game where you explore what scares you? And Wraith especially, do you want to play a game where you explore what scares you about yourself?
Yeah.
Like all of these have this avenue for psychodrama and shadow work and like digging deep into the cracks and flaws in our world and our society and ourselves. And for me, that's a huge appeal. And I think something that gives people a cathartic release in a time where we don't necessarily have a lot of control about what's going on in the world around us. Ghost Hunters lets us dig into the stain left behind by terrible things and how humans, regular people, might react to that, and how regular people might react to encountering not just the paranormal, but truly supernatural elements. It's also a really nice transition to go from, I'm just playing people who aren't familiar with this world or this lore, to begin as a character by studying the lore and learning what's a vampire, what's a werewolf, what's actually out there in this world.
I completely agree. And I mean, that's actually set me thinking, because a lot of people have come up to me over my years with World of Darkness and have said, for instance, Wraith is a game I'm intimidated by, or I don't think I could handle that subject matter with my group. And they've even said Werewolf, it seems a bit too dire. The threat against you, it seems impossible. And so where's the reward? How am I supposed to make my players feel like they've achieved anything? And it is a common feature between Wraith and Werewolf that doesn't get mentioned enough. There's not only the existential struggle, there's the internal one. There's the link between you and your family, your friends, the people who aren't necessarily like you. They are not other like you. They're not supernatural like you, and yet that you still care for them, and hopefully they still care for you. And something I've often said, especially for Wraith, is, and I echo Richard Dansky, the sort of legendary Wraith developer, when I say I think Wraith is the most optimistic World of Darkness game, and I'm not being glib when I say that. I think it is the one where you have the opportunity to come to terms with things you've done, things you haven't done, and find a certain level of peace and satisfaction with them, maybe frustration, but it's a game that allows you as a player to play a character that really examines themselves, really gets to a point where you can move on to the great mystery beyond. Not many games offer that. And while it can feel deep and intimidating to explore that kind of mystery, it's also immensely rewarding to do it. Not every single game needs to be a heartbreaker. Not every single session needs to be a tearjerker. Sometimes you're going to be fighting specters. Sometimes you're going to be haunting that bastard who fired you before you died. You know, sometimes you can be trivial and light-hearted with a game like Wraith. And of course, see Ghost Hunters from quite the other side. You can interact with these Ghost Hunters. You can explain why you need to hang on for just a little longer. But when you do hit those personal horror moments, and they're not always horror, they're just those personal moments, it will reward you, I think, as a role player, perhaps more than any other role-playing game can. I've been through many Wraith Chronicles, many Werewolf Chronicles, and I think when I say that it's the most optimistic World of Darkness game, it's because when players get to the end of those Chronicles and actually finish character arcs, they always come away thinking, wow, that was worth doing. That, you know, that never fell short, because they have control over how their characters feel ultimately and how they come to peace. And players naturally drive their characters toward that peaceful conclusion, which I think is something very special. So we'll go on from that and just have a quick look at the Twitch questions. Let's see. Oh, so there's actually quite a lot of questions, especially from, it turns out, Nicholas, the Lion. So we'll zip through these. First of all, first person, we'll get a consensus, as the technocracy would say. Do you guys enjoy the Macaulay?
Hell yes, they're awesome. Who doesn't love the memory of Gaia? And they've got big teeth.
Yeah, Kat is waving the flag for the Macaulay. Michelle, you're are you on the fence?
I'm on the fence. I am not the person to chime in on it though, because of all of them, Werewolf was the one that I didn't completely vibe with. And that's just a personal thing. Like, there's always going to be a game where it's like, but not my favorite. And that is totally just me.
Yeah, well, no, that's not a criticism of the game.
Yeah, no, it's a great game. Like,
and how about you, Macaulay?
Yeah, I love reptiles, and the Macaulay are cool. So it's simple like that. And I also love sharks and snakes, so I love Nagas and Rokia. But so you can see the mind process there. I love it.
Well, I don't.
Whoa.
Yeah, I'll say it. I'll say it. It's not. They've got plenty of interesting gifts. They've got a perfectly fascinating history. I've got nothing against their place in the game in toto, but in my sessions, my Chronicles Macaulay are basically mythological at that point, because I struggle to balance personal horror or even feral savage horror or whatever you want to call it with where Tyrannosaurus Rexes. But that's me. I'm a purist. What can I say?
I think no, I'm not letting you get away with this. No, the Macaulay are better when the threat of where Tyrannosaurus Rex exists, better than when they go into, like, you know, full archid form and start screeching like dinosaurs and ripping things apart on screen.
I agree. If you're in the Umbra and you're thinking, what the hell, have we just been sent back several hundreds of thousands of years? But well, maybe you can stand to convince me, Kat. We shall see. So here's another.
Work on that, Kat.
We will. We'll get him.
Here's another a good question, and I want to put it more broadly because Nicholas has asked, do you think the mockery breed, so that's you've got were cockroaches, were apes, that sort of thing, can be redeemed, betray the worm, and help the Garu? I want to broaden that question because Wraith and Ghost Hunters deal with specters who, up to a point, were basically described as irredeemably sour to describe them some way. Their shadow has overtaken them. And likewise, Werewolf doesn't just have mockery breeds, it has black spiral dancers. So I want to broaden the question to say, how do you handle such a redemption story? should it be possible? Is it betraying, I guess, the horror of the setting to allow these creatures that are portrayed as this is the absolute evil of the setting as redeemable? Michelle, what are your thoughts on that for specters, black spiral dancers, these other denizens of the pit?
As a writer, as a person, as a GM, I don't believe in absolutes. Never have. So when there are stories that can go there, that can take the characters through that redemption arc, whether they are saving someone or they themselves are being saved. We did a one-shot many, many years ago where you were all black spiral dancers and you had to try to find your way back or not. And there's something incredibly satisfying about working through that kind of an arc. So I don't think it should be off the table. I do think it should be up to each person, each game, each chronicle, what a person is going to want and what the DM is willing to kind of deal with. But I think that that door should be open in all cases, in the same way that we should never rule out the possibility of having all your heroes corrupted too.
Yeah, well, I think that's the perfect answer. I think that applies to any of the so-called evil, big evils of any of the games. You are, in a way, limiting yourself if you don't have a window, even if it's a narrow one, to telling a story like that. And I think it shows, because one of the biggest questions we have always got when it comes to these games is, how can I bring back the White Howlers? Or can I bring back the Cappadocians in Vampire? Or, it's always about, is there a chance to undo the damage? And it's a really interesting human mentality that we bring in as players and storytellers, that when we see a tragedy that's occurred in this fiction, whether it's the Bunyip or whether it's the Salubri or such, our instinct is, but is there any chance? Is there a chance to reverse this? I think it's a good testament to the sorts of people that like to play these games, that they don't just say, ha, the Salubri wiped out, they deserved it. They might do in character as Tremere, but as players, we want stories of redemption and hope, I think. So, before we go back to Twitch chat, I'm going to skip a couple of the questions or agenda points now, and go for another interesting one, I think. This is the wishing well question. Let's start with you, Kat. If you could create a book for either of these game lines, so Ghost Hunters / Wraith or Werewolf, what subject would you want to cover regardless of saleability? So this is a dream project for either of these avenues into the world of darkness, Kat.
Ooh, okay.
I'll take notes, because technically I'm still the World of Darkness developer, and I can always steal your ideas. We're only on live stream, it's fine.
Oh. It's all right, you can just pay me to make the book. That's a possibility too.
Oh, damn, yeah, I don't have to steal.
Don't steal, you don't even have to do it. You just go, make it so.
Yeah. It's like after Walter White shoots Mike and says, oh, I could have got the list off of whatever her name was. Yeah, thanks. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
That's all right. That gave me 20 seconds to think, which is very helpful. So most of my favorite things to write are stories and chronicles. And what I would love to do that I don't think anyone's ever done in the world of darkness is take a bunch of fairly normal mortals, say ghost hunters, on a life-changing, mind-bending journey through the underworld or the spirit world. I would like to just put normal people with no context into this deep well of symbolism and personal ick, and see what comes out the other end.
Okay, yeah, okay. So it could be a world tour of the world of darkness, almost, if you're starting as mortals and going through all of this this long arc. But I like the sound of that.
Yeah, ending up in the atrocity realm, obviously.
Obviously.
What kind of holiday is it otherwise?
Well, I mean, you could go to Malpheus, but that's pushing things too far. How about you, Michaeli? if you could do any book.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I've been thinking for a while. Can you give me a little bit more, because
Yeah.
I'm having
Well-
trouble with this.
Okay, what about you, Michelle? Any thoughts?
Well, first, trying to come up with something nobody's done before is
That's
steep.
difficult.
right,
Yeah.
right. Like I'm going through the list of stuff. I'm going to lean into like my favorite places to live in this world. Is I always loved some of the implicit crossover between the worm and the corruption and all of that, and cosmic horror. So not explicitly Lovecraft, but something that allowed us to play a little bit in that world, maybe dialing back to a different time period, 1920s. So
Yeah.
giving us a world where we can go back to the way certain things were before other things changed. And just exploring a what if. That's kind of where I would end up going.
I think that is possible. I mean, especially with Werewolf, because Werewolf has its Fomori, it has its corruptions of the soul, if you like, or corruptions of the spirit. And if you were viewing all of those things through a mortal's eyes, as an example, playing a game of Ghost Hunters where you're less interacting with ghosts as we commonly envision them, and more about the defamation of the soul, as the Catholic Church would have or deformity of the soul, would put it, it would really be an interesting insight into the world of Werewolf the Apocalypse, because we never, Fomori are almost always presented as, this is them, they are there, this because you are werewolves, these are agents of the worm, and you slice them down. What do mortals think when they see this monstrosity? It's that could be fun. Okay, so yeah. Michaeli, did you come up with anything?
Yeah, so something. But since it's regardless of how it would do well with sales, I think there's a little bit that to explore the possibility of actually indeed redeeming the worm and trying to. I'm going the crossover way because both the worm and Oblivion are forces in the setting that always really struck me, and so a chronicle that could take the entropy embodied by the worm and free it in a way that can make peace with the concept and the oblivion looming down below it further. That's something that's not an easy thing to write, nor nor any easier to involve characters with, but it's a current I had in my mind for a long while, and you actually made me unearth this because it's an old thing I had in mind, and I hadn't think about this for a lot.
I think it's wonderful that we can go from the idea of playing something that's very mundane, very human, all the way through to something that's utterly cosmic and, I guess, spiritually changing. The idea of redeeming the worm that's a massive undertaking, but it's also something that would be a lot of fun to read. It's basically playing Werewolf on a different scale, to use the story path terms, but why not? Why shouldn't it be possible? If you can play werewolves to the point that they are elders and they have all of these gifts, have a chronicle in place where they can interact with huge typical archetypal foes and maybe not just want to destroy them, maybe approach them with a bit more wisdom, and instead of going for the glory all the time, the renown. For me, I would probably go for, I'm always fond of Wraith the Oblivion, as people know, and if I could do anything with Wraith, it would, and I know it wouldn't be saleable, sadly. I would want to do a Black Death era Wraith the Oblivion book, much as, you know, we've got Vampire the Dark Ages. There was Wraith the Great War, of course. I think having a Wraith core book that was set in the 14th century in Europe, interacting with all the comings and goings, the various feudal wars that were raging at the time, along with the backdrop of Black Death. I don't know. I've got lots of ideas for how the underworld might look in such a case, and I think it could be a lot of fun. Also, using the guilds from Wraith, and a part of Wraith that isn't applauded enough, and seeing how they would interact with the world in a different time period, way before the 20th century, certainly, would be of interest to me. Now, I'll have one last look at the Twitch before we get onto our... In fact, I'm going to pose something now, and I'm going to let you three think about it. Yeah, you've probably already read it. And it's let's brainstorm a crossover between Wraith, Ghost Hunters, and Werewolf. So something, a chronicle idea, can be as simple as a single story hook, or it could be as long-winded as you like. Have a think about it. We'll come back to that. I will just have a quick look on Twitch, see if we've got any other questions. I think... Oh, okay, well, Zach says Circanus ad for the cover of Howls of the Apocalypse. Well, I don't have a Circanus ad for the cover. I mean, we might be able to make one, but I do have some Circanus ads that I wrote. I've written some ad copy for Circanus cigarettes. We've got one here called Take a Risk with Circanus. So imagine a cigarette advert, if you like. I know they're not very common these days. With risk comes excitement. You're in the city with a date. You know she likes you and you clean up well, but do you know what will set her over the edge? Put a Circanus cigarette between your lips. You're driving 80 down the highway, cutting through traffic to meet that crucial appointment. Do you know what you need to sharpen those senses and feel the moment? Put a Circanus cigarette between your lips. With risk comes excitement. With risk comes cool. Put us between your lips. The only answer can be a Circanus cigarette. When I wrote these ads, it's toasted. When I wrote this ad copy, I was talking to one of my regular gaming group about it. They said it's very irresponsible to write ads for cigarettes, even in a role-playing game, because you might make someone who has given up smoking suddenly want to start. To that, I say this is satire. These aren't real ads. You can't buy Circanus cigarettes. I take the viewpoint under advisement, but certainly smoking Circanus cigarettes is ill-advised for your health and spiritual stability. So now we get to our question, now that the ad break is done. We are talking about a crossover between Wraith, Ghost Hunters, and Werewolf. How would we do it? I'm going to go to each of you and see if we can actually merge any of these ideas. Let's see. We'll start with Michelle.
I'd start with a paranormal team or an investigative team, just humans who are not familiar with any of this stuff, which also allows the possibility for them to stumble face first into something from any of the worlds and not necessarily knowing that they should be separate. They might confuse what they're perceiving from the werewolf Umbra with something that is more paranormal or more wraith, and there's so many options for things crisscrossing.
Okay, so I think we've got our mortal angle. What are you thinking, Kat?
So we start with a cairn, or what was once a cairn, long decades ago taken by Pentex forces. And as Pentex are wont to do, turning it to their own purposes, building on it, let's say, a research lab, a place where awful things happen to intelligent creatures, leaving us with a nasty cyst in reality of corruption and spiritual pain that's never going to go away. But there is potentially a cool urban exploration location for ghost hunters.
Yeah, and that ties in nicely. That does tie in nicely, because that is where our hunters can wander to thinking, yeah, this is going to be our Blair Witch and they may get a little more than they bargained for. What about you, Michele? How are you going to throw a monkey wrench in these works?
There are some werewolf tribes that have some connection with the underworld or the Dark Umbra. So I'll say about a former Silent Strider pack that didn't end well when they tried to cleanse the location. And they aren't here anymore, but maybe their specters are, or rather, shades of them are there as connected by their pack totem that got trapped in there by the corruption and the pull of the labyrinth in there.
Okay, all right. So this cairn once belonged to a pack predominantly silent striders. We've now got urban explorers, paranormal investigators poking around it. And unfortunately, they're about to overturn the wrong stone. And I think I will finish this chronicle hook by saying that the Pentex subsidiary that was responsible may have only just been recently acquired. It is a company by the name of Terrell and Squibb. They are a group that is introduced in Orpheus, the role-playing game. They are the less ethical, if Orpheus can be described as ethical, spiritual projection agency. And certainly they play around an awful lot with shadows and specters. And I think, why not? Why not have them be a part of Pentex, knowingly or not? And so maybe they are clandestinely sponsoring these paranormal investigations because they want to see how ripe is this land? Is this fertile for us to till for our purposes? Why not send in some hapless students with cameras to record it all before we send in some real professionals? So there you go. There, we have managed to connect up Ghost Hunters, Werewolf, Wraith, and even Orpheus. Surprising. Now we're going to be wrapping up in just a minute. I will use this opportunity to say that if you haven't picked up Ghost Hunters, it is available on DriveThruRPG. It's also available in print, as in traditional print. You can buy it from Studio 2, IPR. There's money off, so do get it. Not only that, Ghost Hunters has 2 source books attached to it. You have The Longest Night, which is our jumpstart, penned amazingly well by Kat. Kat, the master of jumpstarts, if I dare say so. And we also have the Paranormal Investigator's Handbook, which for a while was the Paranormalist's Handbook, and I love putting ists on the ends of words that don't really need them, like Joe Orton saying in, I think, Loot, "Are you an orphanist? You look very muscular with it." I like that. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent. We also have Wraith 20, of course, and I will always be happy for as long as Wraith 20 is selling well. Wraith 20 and Book of Oblivion that goes with it, that does indeed have rules for redeeming specters. And then all the way over in Werewolf the Apocalypse land, we have the Apocalyptic Record, which is still available to back on Backakit. You can still pre-order it, so please do so. It shows your support for the line and does make it more likely that we will continue to produce books for it. Along with the upcoming Howls of the Apocalypse and Icons of Rage. So thank you so much to all of my wonderful co-hosts. You have been incredibly fantastic. You've spoken fine words. And thank you so much for all of the viewers as well. Really appreciate your time, giving us your support and supporting the convention too. Do sign up for games on Start Playing. If you've still got time later today, play a game you've never played before. That's the point of these conventions. If you've never played Aeon, you've never played They Came From, you've never played whatever, there will be games of these games running, and all you have to do is sign up. So we are going to sign off now and say, bye-bye, everybody. Do look up each of us, look up our respective work, support it. Thank you so much. And sign us off, Johnny.